started. So we'll start off with response to RFP for parking operations and maintenance. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Good evening. The first item today is a recap, if you will, or an update, I should say, with regard to the RFP that we put out recently, requesting proposals from parties that are interested in potentially continuing the management and maintenance of our parking facility on our behalf, on the city's behalf, essentially as an operator or contractor to that regard. We did get some responses, and we wanted to review those with you quickly tonight and kind of update you as to where we think it should go from here, if that's all right. So with that, if I could defer to Ms. Becker to walk us through that, I'd appreciate it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Ms. Becker.
Your Honor, members of council, we did issue the RFP. I'm sorry on the feedback. I don't know where that's coming from. Okay. We issued the RFP for the parking operations and maintenance. We received 3 responses, 2 from out of state, and then 1 from the Downtown Development Authority, who has managed the operations for us over the last approximately 8 years. The next step is to have a selection committee review the proposals. That selection committee is made up of city staff and a council representative. The committee will be composed of myself, Tom Pitlick, our finance director, Matt Thomason, our buildings and structures manager, and Vice Mayor Kristen Lutz. And we will begin the review process as early as tomorrow. That's my update.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, do you mind if I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Ms. Becker, what's the name of the other 2 entities that submitted proposals?
Okay. I'm sorry, the feedback had me a little scared to talk too much. So one is Interstate Parking out of Wisconsin, and the other is Republic Parking Systems out of Chattanooga and their Denver office.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And then we will be back. We'll be back to council, obviously, with a recommendation after the review.
Okay, any questions from council? Okay, all right. We'll move on then to Casper Community Greenhouse. Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you. Council had asked that we follow up with regard to some questions that council was concerned about in the meeting of the work session last week as it relates to potentially supporting this project. And as council will recall, this is a project that would require about, I'm going to say $36,000 in capital funding in order to cover the building fees that are associated with running water to the project and the subject area, and also taking on the capital cost of doing that as well. In the interim, we reviewed the information that we had put together during the last time that council had spoken with the petitioner regarding this project, and also weighed in with the city attorney's office pursuant to their concerns previously as well. And indeed, the attorney's office brought up some very salient points that we wanted to bring to your attention this evening that would actually encourage our suggestion of not supporting this project due to some inconsistencies, if you will, with regard to the use of taxpayer dollars for projects of this nature. And so if it would please the council, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to defer to the attorney to walk us through some of those concerns and get your direction and questions after.
Okay, Mr. Henley?
Good morning, or
Now I got you
good
going.
evening, Mayor. They all blend together. Well, thank you, and I do have a couple of comments about this. First of all, we start off with our analysis, as we do with all of these requests coming through community projects, thinking about the constitutional requirements that the city can just not provide funds to any type of group, organization, or individual unless there is an appropriation that would be for the needs of the poor. And so that's under Article 16.6 of the Constitution. And then we do have some other authorized methods by which the city government can fund organizations, basically for the advertisements of resources of the community, such as fairs, expositions, conventions, things of that nature, basically promoting the exhibits and advertising the city in some capacity. In addition to that, we have the ability, under certain circumstances, to utilize city funds for contracting with agencies throughout the city for community human services. And that's the way a lot of these things, particularly when we're dealing with providing food for the poor or things of that nature, helping people with disabilities and the like, that's authorized by statute as well. So we start off by taking a look at that, and in looking at the community garden brochure, I was wondering what they were giving the city. We were providing infrastructure to improve a property that's not owned by the city and not even owned by the community gardens, but which would be under lease by them. What is the service that they're providing? They're going to be planting some garden area. And then looking at the proposal they submitted last time, basically they will grow vegetables, or will hope to grow vegetables, and then we'll sell them to the schools or to some other agency so that people will have fresh vegetables. And it doesn't seem to be really to comport with those things that we would think about. There's no concrete on what they're going to sell them for. We know that they will have certain overhead costs, including personnel, insurance, and certainly they're requesting to include any water or sewer fees to be waived by the city, and that wasn't contemplated. But nevertheless, we do have these initial amounts for infrastructure. And looking at that, we just didn't feel, and we had not felt in the past, and I think a couple of times in the past, that this particular service that was being offered would fall within the ambit of the Constitution or any of those statutory expanding type of provisions. So we would state to the council that it would be our opinion, based upon what we've reviewed, that this would not be an appropriate expenditure for the council to make on behalf of the city of Casper.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, I guess to clarify on if this project wanted to get funding, there are other means they could do through our community grant, or if they wanted 1 cent, they would apply for either one of those, correct? With, I think like on 1 cent, they had to bring a project proposal forward and would ask for 1 cent money through that process of whatever the paperwork may be to that, but go through a process. They can go that route as opposed to what's in front of us today, correct?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct, and as a matter of fact, they do have that background of having gone through a couple of those processes in the past, and so that wouldn't be unfamiliar to them.
Okay. Yeah. Does council have any questions or comments or concerns? Councilman Hopkins. Councilman Hopkins, I see that your mic is on, but we can't hear you. Okay, does anybody else have comments while we're waiting for Bob to come back? All right. Okay, Councilman
Okay, let's try
Hopkins.
again. Sorry, I did have it plugged in. It's pretty clear when you read the lease that it is the responsibility of the leasee to get any utilities that are required to it. And so I think while they may have entered into a favorable lease for themselves, I'm not sure they shouldn't look a little bit closer, and I concur with our legal folks.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments? All right, so Mr. City Manager, so at this point, the recommendation is that we do not move forward on this project, correct?
Mr. Mayor, that is staff's recommendation, and, you know, council can certainly guide us as you see fit.
Do you need a vote then, or a thumbs up, thumbs down on?
If council concurs, that would be helpful to know, you bet.
Okay, so the recommendation right now is to not move forward on this. Oh, Councilman Cathy.
Yes, I had one question. You had just mentioned the 1 cent process, but I was thinking in the email that we received earlier that basically this was going through with the 1 cent process, and it was deemed there that this organization is not of the right qualification to qualify for 1 cent as well. I believe that was correct as well, isn't it, Mr. Mr. Manager, and Mr. City Attorney?
Thank you, Councilman. I believe you're correct. I think, in fact, in the past when we've recommended that the funds not be awarded to this particular group, that I don't know if it was 1 cent funds that were requested specifically, but still that constitutional requirements, those requirements that on what city funds can be utilized for aren't waived just because it's 1 cent fund versus other funds. You could go through and you could reapply if in fact your organization were to be able to incorporate some of the particular needs that are authorized either under the Constitution or under statutes. But you're exactly right, Councilman Cathy, that there are still those underlying principles and requirements that the council should have before they expend public monies that might benefit not the community, but would benefit individuals, corporations, or associations particularly.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a brief comment. You know, when I was in the nonprofit world, I was always bragging about my perception, many others, that our nonprofit community, with the various organizations, were mutually supportive, and that we had a lot of people pulling for each other, and there was a real absence of issues, such as in a lot of communities. And I just was very disappointed in some of the criticism and emails that we received of the Greenhouse project. You know, maybe it wasn't the right way to go about it, and maybe the timing wasn't, maybe they don't qualify. But that atmosphere is something we should treasure and promote. And I would ask the people who are critical of this request to rethink how to approach organizations with missions that are similar to theirs, because it's not a zero-sum game. When people are working together and finding common ground and pushing for each other, everyone benefits. I was really disappointed to kind of see an absence of that for some comments.
All right, any other comments? Okay, so the direction right now is to not move forward at this time on this project. So with that being said, can I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down from council? Okay. All right. We'll move on to protest response costs. Mr. Napier?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Some of the question that we had gotten by virtue of last meeting and in the interim as well is with regard to what it cost to work with the protests and try to manage those dynamics and so forth. Fortunately, by the end of the week in question, we were able to get some assistance from other agencies, which of course helped leverage the resources that we have on hand, you know, work with as I said, the dynamics that at times were fairly fluid throughout that week. For the week in question, in order to work with the protests and so on, the city spent right at $50,000 in overtime costs, and that does include overtime costs that we are reimbursing for the city of Cheyenne, who sent some folks up to augment what it was that we were able to bring on hand that night. So I felt inclined to want to give you that information since we'd gotten a number of questions about it. If there are other questions we can entertain pertaining to this information or others that maybe we can work on in addition to this, we'd be happy to know that too.
Okay. Any questions from council on the cost? Councilman Powell.
Mr. Mayor, I may have just misread the spreadsheet, but were we saying that some of these officers were on duty for 10 hours covering these protests? Because I was at the Friday march and it lasted about 45, well, it lasted about an hour and a half with the speeches. So I don't understand, unless I misread the spreadsheet, why we would be having somebody on duty for that length of time to ensure safety.
Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, indeed, we had a period of activity throughout the week that was involved. A lot of the time was incurred on the Wednesday activities that proceeded from lunch through the evening hours. And so some of the calculations that you're seeing here included those events, which in many cases were not hours that we were anticipating having to incur for that week. So yeah, it is quite possible that we had, you know, hours along the lines of which Mr. Powell is describing, Councilman Powell is describing.
Any other questions or comments? And Mr. Napier, it's my understanding that we have, there are some law enforcement agencies that came to assist us that did not charge us. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct. For that, we're very grateful.
Okay.
Of course.
Okay. Anything else on that one?
No, sir.
Okay. We'll move on to the Midwest Avenue reconstruction. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. One of the speakers this evening will discuss some concerns that his client has, Reconstruction, with respect to the decision this evening that the staff is proposing to award the second phase of the Midwest Avenue project to 71 Construction, which was the lowest apparent bidder. Part of the commentary that you will hear probably contested is that, in fact, Trado submitted a bid that was indeed lower than what it was 71 Construction submitted. However, as we have communicated to you via email and so on, the part that made the bid unusable is with regard to the federal requirements that we need in our contractors to abide by, given the fact that we are indeed using federal funding to help complete this project. We wanted to take the opportunity in pre-meeting tonight to go through some of those details with you in preparation not only for that conversation with the Trado's council, but also with regard to that formal decision that you'll have this evening to award the second phase of Midwest Avenue. I do have Mr. Beamer on the phone here who can give you a lot of the detail as well as to what exactly all this means, if council would prefer. But otherwise, this time is for you to ask questions and try to understand the issue a little better if necessary.
We want to go to Mr. Beamer then, or?
That would be just fine, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Beamer?
Mayor, council, I think city manager did a nice job. We've got a number of funding sources for this second phase of Midwest. The federal component is the TAP grant that we were awarded, which requires then the entire project to comply with these federal bidding requirements. And those requirements were clearly identified in the contract documents and acknowledged by Reconstruction, as with all of the other contractors that bid on the project. And even as of today's date, we cannot verify Trado Construction's DUNS number with SAM.gov. So we would continue to be in a holding pattern, not knowing if or when he might achieve that registration. And I'll be happy to answer any additional questions.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Beamer, if we would have gone ahead with this, would we have had the federal funding, or we would have to give it back to the feds? The difference? Councilman Hopkins, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think I get the gist of it. We were not allowed to award the project without concurrence from YDOT and the federal oversight. So we would not have been allowed to award this contract to Trado Construction at this time. But everyone submitted a possible bid, and therefore we got YDOT's concurrence to award to Reconstruction Construction. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, Councilman. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Andrew, you've read Mr. Perkins' letter, I think, that his attorney, who talks about the latitude that the cities have in his review of statute to overlook what he calls minor discrepancies. And so is he incorrect that we could overlook this if we chose to and didn't proceed with the project?
Mayor, Councilman Powell, you're also breaking up a little bit for me, so I think I get the gist of the question. You've got a number of options here. You can award to the second low bidder, which is the staff's recommendation to 71 Construction. You could simply reject all bids and rebid this, allowing Trado Construction sufficient time to obtain his DUNS number. Or I guess you could delay award, although their bids are only valid for 30 days, so you couldn't even delay the bid award for the next council meeting, because that would be well beyond the 30 days when the bids were opened. We opened bids on this project on May 27th, and it's interesting to note in Mr. Drew Perkins' letter that Trado Construction didn't even actively ask for a DUNS number till, I believe, June 9th. So well after the bids were opened. And again, you can go in SAM.gov today and you will not see a valid DUNS number for Trado Construction.
Okay, thanks.
Andrew, I guess just to clarify then, the number that Mr. Perkins has in there for Trado Construction, as of today, that still doesn't show up as their number, correct?
Mayor, I'm not sure if you're asking me a question, but I can't. I believe you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Mayor, we can't hear you from on this side.
Mr. Mayor, I wonder if they can hear me. looks like we might be muted. Is that correct?
Can you hear us now? Okay, all right. So, Andrew, just my real quick question was the number that Mr. Perkins has in the letter for Trado as of today, you still can't verify that that is a number given to them, correct?
Mayor, that's correct.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Beamer, did the rest of the contractors fulfill that obligation and provide those numbers upon submitting of their bids?
Mayor, City Manager, I believe they did. We certainly checked Trado as the front low bidder, and then we went to 71 Construction, and certainly 71 Construction has a valid DUNS number. I'd hate to misspeak and say we checked them all, but we certainly checked Trado and the next low bidder of 71 Construction.
Thank you.
Councilman Hopkins. Bob, we need you to turn your mic on.
Sorry, that's exactly what I was talking about. I think we're getting the clicking and the feedback from the City Hall microphone. And so when they're not talking, we probably need to turn that sucker off. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, any other comments or questions from anybody on council? Okay. We need anything else on that, Mr. Manager? All right. We'll move on to in-person meetings. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The recent orders that came out last week indicated some information that would lead one to believe that doing in-person meetings and so forth, as an example, this meeting would be ostensibly quite possible. I have asked the city clerk to look into those orders and visit with our local docs and get a feel for the feasibility of indeed coming back into this building and in this room, as a matter of fact, and having conversations with the business of the public altogether again. The language that caught my attention that gave me that hope was with regard to the interior numbers being changed and actually increased from 25 to 50 participants, if you will, but also with regard to the inclusion of the language that says without restriction. And so to me that meant restriction in the form of perhaps distancing, perhaps masking, other issues that might prevent a public gathering in a room like this. We did follow up on the meaning of that language, and our local docs indicated that we are talking about distancing and we are talking about masking, even though indeed 50 people could be gathered in a room of this nature. So my question to council tonight is, what would your desire be, not only as it relates to this gathering in this forum, but also as it relates to what your tolerance is for City Hall during the day and its entertainment of public involvement within the building and within our staff on a face-to-face basis, albeit different face-to-face, if you will. And so that really is my purpose for wanting to visit with you tonight, what direction you would have and what things you'd have us look further into.
Okay, questions, input for opening up City Hall to daily traffic and then as far as our meetings go. Councilman Bates.
Me personally, I'm all for it. Without the face mask, maybe as people are coming in and out, social distancing, as far as council, meeting there. I don't think we need to worry too much about social distancing. Maybe as the public comes in, keeping it one chair apart from each other, in my opinion. That's my thoughts.
Anyone else? Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first, I want to apologize for being a little bit late tonight. I don't know, for some reason, my computer didn't want to log in, and the global GoToMeetings didn't like me tonight. And but that's how my whole day. Those of you that know me know that I am first, foremost, and always about safety, to take care of myself, to take care of everybody else's safety. The things that I'm seeing in the press and everything are that we're, the numbers of infection rates are just skyrocketing. I don't think we can keep closed forever. I would love to be back to open meetings. I would love to have everybody in town coming to our meetings. I really, really would like to be doing that. But I think that our primary responsibility, first off, is the safety of everybody involved. I think that that's what we need to focus on. And I bring that up because, quite frankly, I think that the idea of having people running around right now without face masks, without regard to social distancing, totally ignoring all the suggestions of the health authorities, is just irresponsible and bordering on reckless. And I think that we really need to be careful about this. I would say that as soon as practical, to open up City Hall where we could have social distancing. I don't know that we can require everybody that comes into the building to have a face mask on, but certainly suggesting it, having face masks and hand sanitizer available at the hallways. I was down at the county building buying some license tags and taking care of those kind of things. It seemed to me that the way the county was operating those offices was pretty responsible and pretty doable. And I'd like to see something like that. As far as our council meetings go, the idea of having an open council meeting where everybody can come, but only a limited number of people can come into the room. I don't know. I'm a little bit troubled by that. There again, I think that we need to observe social distancing in that. If we can do that, great. If we can't, maybe we need to move to a bigger venue. Maybe we need to talk to the school district about going to one of their auditoriums or something like that. I don't know. I would love to get back to in-person meetings and everything, but I just think we got to be really careful and follow all the health rules on this.
Councilman Johnson.
I just wanted to say that it's really hard to hear, and I think the public's going to have a really hard time hearing this, so I don't know how we fix that.
Can we move that computer where somebody can be playing this? I don't know that I can.
Yeah, this is muted over here, so I don't know. We'll work on our technical difficulties. Councilman Bates.
Sorry, my wife is listening to the meeting on her headset, and she's saying that they're not getting any feedback from that. It's just us that are getting this feedback.
Okay. Any other, Councilman Cathy?
Well, I guess I would have to go along a bit with Councilman Bates' ideas and some of Councilman Huber's ideas of the county courthouse model to go ahead and open up the city offices. As far as us meeting in person, I think they are much better meetings than trying to meet like this. And I think we get more accomplished with in-person meetings, even if we have to figure out a way to just allow people in for the certain parts of the meeting. People meet, and then as soon as that part's over, they leave. Well, we could bring them in that same way and allow that. But, the newspaper is reporting the coasts. They are not reporting what's happening in the middle parts of the country. And I think we need to look at what's happening to Casper and go from there.
Well, I'd give you my comments on it. I think that I'd like to see us open back up here at City Hall also. As far as the meetings go, I kind of like the idea. It's summertime, so if people want to social distance outside and come in when the topic comes up and just bring them in to discuss those topics, I think that'd be the way of doing it, and we could all get back into the council chambers and have these meetings, because honestly, I love technology, but every week it's something else that's going on, and I think it's dragging these meetings out to late hours of the night that we don't need to. If we were all right here, we could talk to one another and scratch the difficulties out of there. It'd save a lot of time. So my vote is to bring everybody back down here and start having meetings again, leave people outside until their topics come up, or if we don't have that many social distance in the chambers itself, and get business rolling again in the city. Anybody else? Vice Mayor Lewis.
I think, especially if we're gonna all be sitting 2 feet apart, it's plenty fine to have people sitting out here. I think we just did like we did right before everything got really bad, where we just, put the little caution tapes and make sure that there's 6 feet between seats, and, potentially have somebody like in the back when they come in, saying you have to sit in a seat that doesn't have the tape on it. And because there are quite a few seats here. Obviously, if we fill up every single seat we have available, sand zones with tape on them, then I think we could ask people to wait outside.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we can do it. I think if we have people sit behind where we sit normally in our chairs, or we have some council members sit down in front, and when you want to be recognized, we approach the bench, so to speak, and we talk just as we're doing now. I think we can all be there, and just as you suggested, we would have people come in when they want to talk. But we're still having a problem. The City Hall mic is always on. If you can't turn it off, that's where the clicking's coming from, guys. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that, are we all in agreement then of trying to get everybody back down here to council chambers and carrying on our meetings from here? Okay, and then as far as you need an answer, as far as opening City Hall up also, back to daily traffic in City Hall, thoughts on that? Or thumbs up, thumbs down?
Well, I'm thumbs up if it's done according to proper guidelines.
Okay. All right. Mr. City Manager, would we be able to, I'm assuming we could, I'm sure we would have one entrance, one exit, and so we could have masks available at the doors for people coming in?
Mr. Mayor, that would absolutely be something we could do. You bet.
Okay, and then same thing for council meetings, that people that come in for those, leave them there for an option for them to wear?
Positively.
Okay.
Positively.
All right, any other questions? Vice Mayor Lutz.
Yeah, kind of like what Mike Huber said. I know that the county has they have tape lines on the floor. They've literally got somebody at the door kind of telling them, like, heads up, this is what it's going to look like when you get in there. Here's the things we need you to be doing while you're in our building, and, et cetera, et cetera. I understand that that can't be enjoyable for the person standing at the door, but it seemed to work pretty well when I went to the county, so.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, in that regard then, if we could have the balance of the week to work out some of those protocol issues and get real clarity from our local docs and so forth as we work toward opening, I would bet we could be open no later than the next 2 weeks at the very latest, and probably sooner than that, as it relates to daily operations.
Okay, everybody good with that? Let them put a protocol in place. Next 2 weeks, we'll be up and running.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Councilman Bates.
To clarify, does that mean we will meet next week for our work session there, or are we going to do this, or will we be notified by email which one we're going to do?
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates. We will, the work sessions are a little different. They give us a little more flexibility in that we don't typically have an audience. And so I would suspect that that's a little easier to prepare for than a regular business meeting. And so I think the timing is actually very good to have a work session in this building with each other, if that pleases the council.
Okay, and I was just going to make a suggestion. We actually have one more meeting, and then the following Tuesday is a fifth Tuesday, so we're not here. So I'm wondering if maybe we just do one more of these, and then we start off fresh in July, but it's whatever everybody wants. I mean, we can either come back next week, or we could just finish out next week, and then July 1st, it gives us 2 more weeks. We could just start off fresh. Second, option 2. Okay, so option 1 is come back next week to a work session. Option 2 would be start fresh in July. So give me a 1 or give me a 2. All right, looks like 1, 2. Okay, well, I'm going for a 2. You got to say, okay, 1st of July. The 2s have it. All right, are we good with that? All right. And now we'll move on to eventide sole source purchase. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a really critical piece of machinery in the dispatch center that we really need to pick up and get underway and operating and everything else. We are requesting a sole source purchase in that the vendor that we're purchasing this from is one that we've dealt with for a long time and have a lot of supporting equipment along the lines of what they offer. I have Mr. Hoffman here tonight to walk us through that if council would like that detail. Otherwise, we'd really like to get moving and get your blessing in that regard, but we don't want to do so without you having the chance to ask questions.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Mr. Hoffman would like to tell us what this is.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the recorder is a device that records the 911 calls and the non-emergency calls, as well as all the radio traffic that happens for all the agencies. The system that we currently have was put in place in 2013. As of right now, we have less than 6 months worth of storage left on the device. And as of just recently, we are losing recordings on a daily basis. So as soon as that call comes in, we are losing recordings and are unable to retrieve them. The vendor is unable to retrieve them as well. And so we are looking to get this purchased as soon as possible.
So, Mr. Hoffman, is this, are we buying more storage space? Is that what we're doing then, or are we replacing the the entire system?
We are purchasing 6 years worth of storage, which is 12 terabytes. We currently have 1 terabyte that we are dealing with. And so, yes, we are expanding that service.
Okay. Anybody have any questions of Mr. Hoffman? Councilman Huber.
The recordings that we're losing, are those ones that, the oldest, are we losing the oldest ones, or are they just getting bounced out the other end, or are we losing new ones?
We are actually losing both. So we are actually losing old ones and we are losing immediate ones. So as soon as somebody's off the phone, we have tried to retrieve that within 2 minutes, and that recording is actually gone.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Mayor, if I could ask a couple of follow-ups, is there a way, how long will it be to get this new stuff installed?
The vendor said it takes 3 weeks to arrive and about a week to install. So we're looking at about a month once we do the purchase.
In the interim, is there anything that can be done to safeguard the newer calls and bounce out the old ones, or are we just stuck with what it's doing?
We are stuck with what it's doing at this point in time. There is no storage available. So we can't hook up an external piece of storage device. It would be impossible to do.
No, that was a good answer, but that wasn't my exact question. There is not any way that you can go into the programming and tell the system to bounce out the oldest stuff and keep the newest.
No, we can't do that.
I guess a follow-up to his question, we would not want to purge any phone calls anyways, because you really don't know if those calls will ever be needed again, correct?
That's correct, because the requirement is a 2-year retention on 911 calls, and so we don't know whether or not that is actually needed for a court case or even for any litigation. So,
any other questions, Councilman Bates?
Just out of curiosity, how old is the system? And then should we, in the future, look at a backup system if this was to happen again, so we can switch over to that other system and keep the calls? Is that possible, I guess?
So the system was purchased in 2013, so we are at 7 years on this one system. We do have a replacement schedule for the system, and it's usually about 6 years. We have put it off 1 year because it didn't start failing until currently. So we wanted to keep it running as long as we could. If we did a backup storage or a replication service, we would just be adding another $120,000 onto that to do that replication. But this system will allow us to do that purging that is necessary to retain that space as well.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just wondering if this system is independent of all the video that we're recording via police cams. Is that loading it up, or is that an independent system? Thank you.
Yes, sir, that is an independent system. So the GTAC system is a cloud-based system. This system would be locally hosted.
Any other questions, Mr. Hoffman? I remember years ago we were talking about gigabytes, and now we're talking terabytes. So,
yes.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions they have. Thanks.
Thank you.
So you need direction to go forward on the sole source purchase?
Mr. Mayor, though, you have that opportunity tonight to actually determine whether or not you're up or down on the purchase. We're hoping that you will be, and so we wanted to be sure you had all your questions squared away in order to be able to do that tonight.
Okay, anybody else have any questions before we move forward? Okay, so the question being, are you good moving forward with this purchase? Sounds to me like it's much needed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Mr. Mayor, we do need to shut down the system and restart it before we begin our formal meeting, and so I just wanted you to be aware of that unique aspect of tonight's meetings.
okay, that sounds good. Do we have anything on agenda review? And okay, so, oh, wait, Councilman Kathy, and then I'll come back to you, Councilman Pacheco.
I had one quick question on the contract for the Elm to Walnut Street Midwest Avenue extension. Is there a time frame that we have to use that federal money?
Mr. Mayor, do you mind if I defer to Mr. Beamer for that question?
No, that's fine. Mr. Beamer?
Mayor, Councilman Kathy, I'm not sure off the top of my head. Certainly the contract extends all the way to October of 2021. So certainly the federal funds are valid to that date, but I would have to take a look at the TAP agreement to know for sure. It probably extends through the end of the calendar year, so probably through December of 2021, Councilman.
Okay, as a follow-up, the reason I was asking is basically by approving this right now, we are committing to roughly $650,000 of city money, and I didn't know with our uncertainty on budget and things if this was something that and particularly that part of the road isn't really the bad part of the road, so to speak. And right now the city office building is digging I don't mean the city, the state office building is working right there along Midwest and digging close to it, and there's a lot of heavy construction traffic going on for that building, and I didn't know if it would better suit us to postpone this. I realize we've, tentatively awarding the contract, but this is something I was just curious about and trying to figure out if we could potentially do that.
Mayor, Council, keep in mind that we also have a Wyoming Business Council grant for $1.5 million that I think also expires at the same time. So we may risk losing that source of funding if we don't award the contract and move forward.
Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kathy, the other thing to remember too is that indeed a lot of the work that we're anticipating completing will be work necessary to complete the state office building as well. Infrastructure in particular is one of those pieces of their completion elements that they are in need of in order to be able to occupy that building.
Mr. Pacheco, or Councilman Pacheco?
You can call me Mister if you want. Just real quick, I know we have a lot of callers, and I know I made this comment a couple weeks ago, but I think it'd be real critical. We have to distinguish when our callers call if we're going to make a discussion point or if we're going to ask a question to our caller or to our speakers that are signed up. And so I think it's really critical, especially since we don't want to be here till 11 o'clock, that we distinguish those points and wait for discussion. So I would urge my fellow friends to distinguish that point and then ask questions and then wait for the discussion point on that, or else we'll be here all night long. So anyway, just my 2 cents, and I'm just passing that along in my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Pacheco, because I was going to say that when we reset here is to make sure that during the calls tonight, if you do have questions of the caller, direct them to the caller itself. Discussion needs to wait until the end. That way we can get through them. And I think last count we had like 18 callers tonight. So doing the math on that, it's about an hour and a half's worth of phone calls. So let's ask them direct questions and then keep the discussion till later. Anybody else on agenda review?
Sorry, Mayor, I didn't mean to step on your toes. My apologies.
No, you actually reminded me, so. Okay, with that, we're going to reset the video system real quick, and then we'll come right back on and get the meeting started.